Hello everybody, this is Ian here, and today we've got quite an interesting video. Today I'm going to show you 48 and a half frames of missing Doctor Who episodes that you probably didn't know existed, and that I didn't know existed until recently. Now don't get too excited, it's basically nothing, but basically nothing is still something, and when it comes to missing episodes, anything is exciting. First, some quick backstory on how I found this. I'll keep it brief though, because I know you're all here to see these 48 and a half frames. But basically, a video was uploaded last year which showed the entire reel of censor clips recovered from Australia in 1996 by Damien Shanahan, including those from existing stories such as The Invasion and The Ambassadors of Death. I was watching Terror of the Autons the other night, and I knew that there were some clips from that story on the reel, so I pulled it up just to see what Australia thought was too graphic from that story to air, just because I've always been interested in what we would have if a story hadn't been recovered. So, for instance, what surviving clips we'd have from The Dominators or The Invasion, or rather the existing episodes of The Invasion, because there is censor footage from The Invasion, just none from the missing episodes. It's like, if we had no episodes of The Invasion, what censor clips would we have? So I was thinking, if we didn't have Terror of the Autons, I wonder what clips we'd have from it. So I went to watch it, and I ended up watching the whole reel from beginning to end. But in doing so, I made a critical discovery. The frames that the clips in the Lost in Time box set and in loose cannon reconstructions begin and end on are not necessarily the frames that the raw censor clips begin and end on. I noticed this on one of the Fury from the Deep clips, but going back through the reel, I found that nearly all of them have additional footage not released in the Lost in Time box set. It's only 1 or 2 frames per clip, but combined it adds up to roughly 2 seconds of footage that I didn't know existed. So let's show the footage now. I'm going to properly analyze these images afterwards for anyone who wants to stay for that, but for those not interested, here are all of the frames I was previously unaware of. For all of you staying, you don't need to stop and go through this frame by frame, because I'll show them all again later in a few moments, but for now, here they are. Now, anyone who wants to go now can go, but for the rest of you, let's look further into these. The first story to have unreleased footage is The Smugglers, with a total of 9 frames. 1.5 from episode 1, 6.5 from episode 3, and 1 from episode 4. Our first frame is an image from the beginning of the Joseph Longfoot clip. The Lost in Time box set starts with this frame, whereas in the raw footage, that is the second frame. You can tell by the line going through the top of Cherub's head. The real first frame and the first unreleased frame is this one. As you can see, there is no line at the top of the frame, rather the top left corner is missing. Additionally, Longfoot's mouth is open wider and his head is further forward than in the first frame of the released footage. Now watch the two side by side, it's quite clear that the released footage is missing this first frame, which is present in the raw footage. Our second image is also from episode 1, and it is at the tail end of the Longfoot clip. Unfortunately, this is our first example of something quite common in these censor clips, and those are half frames, hence the 48 and a half frames. Only the top half of this frame exists, but it is still an image from the episode I didn't know existed previously. If nothing else, it provides an interesting insight into how episodes were censored in Australia. Seemingly, the prints were not severed in between frames, but cut right through the middle of them, as every image where the top half is missing comes at the beginning of a clip, whereas every image with the bottom half missing comes at the end, which is how a film would run in a projector. Regardless, this half of a frame is clearly not present in the released footage, and this can be further proven by the fact that the frame which the Lost in Time footage ends on has a black diagonal line running across the entire image, which is present in the second to last frame of the raw footage.
Black village.
Our next 8.5 images comes from episode 3. The first 2 of these come from the beginning of the clip where Pike is talking to Jamaica. This was the hardest clip to figure out exactly what was included in Lost in Time and what wasn't, because there was very little movement, and there was no obvious film damage such as the lines tail-ending the Longfoot clip. Ultimately, I think I figured it out based on the white flake, which appears briefly on Pike's hair here, but I'm still not entirely sure about this one and another one later, but I think I figured it out. If you want to go take a look for yourself, you can find the full reels online and you can take a look for yourself. I did the best I could, and I think I got this one right, but I'm not 100%. Now, Here we have these two starting frames. The first seems to have suffered some kind of water damage, but the second seems to be fine. I don't really know why they didn't include it on the Lost in Time box set, and the same go for the two at the end of the clip. I don't know why those weren't included either. It's just, they seem perfectly fine frames that the restoration team just decided not to release on Lost in Time. Regardless, it's an interesting treat to go in and look at this reel and figure out that there's footage that I didn't know existed.
Night. But no.
Our next 1.5 comes from the end of the clip where Pike drops the bloody handkerchief on Jamaica's chest. The released clip and the original clip seem to start on the same image, but they certainly don't end on the same one. Here we have our first example of another fairly common feature among these unreleased frames, and that is the crossfades. In certain situations, in order to make the cut seem natural and not completely awkward and just cases of bad editing, the censors would have to remove not only the questionable clips, but the beginnings of subsequent or previous shots if there was a fade in. Our first frame is halfway through the fade, whereas the second appears to be all of the way through, but the bottom half again is missing. So all we can really see from it is a banister on the left of the frame and an unknown pale-colored something in the middle. Judging from the audio, this might be the top of Cherub's head, as Pike calls out to him in the next shot, and it is definitely on the Black Albatross. This half of a frame is definitely of the Black Albatross set, but exactly what it shows will remain a mystery unless the episode itself turns up one day. From episode 4, we have one image. It is from the end of the clip where Cherub is stabbed, and it is actually the first frame of the next shot, which is very clearly not in the released footage. Although in the last frame of the released footage, you can see the very start of this crossfade. Regardless, these are the frames that I find most interesting about these 48.5 because they show a missing episode from an angle that would otherwise have been lost forever. The angle is not captured in any telesnap, and while it may not seem like very much, it's another piece of the puzzle of what these episodes looked like, clues that are invaluable for any reconstruction or animation attempts. That's the last from the Smugglers, though, and in fact our last from the Hartnell era. The rest all come from Troughton. Starting with the Highlanders, which features 2.5 frames from episode 1. None of these are particularly interesting, as they just continue the action from the clips we already have. We have this image, which is the proper end of the second clip where Alexander fights the Redcoat. The high degree of movement in this clip makes it very easy to tell that the image is not in the released footage. Our next image and a half comes from the end of the hanging clip. The line under the sergeant's eyes gives it away, as it is not present in the Lost in Time footage.
Stand by!
The Underwater Menace features only half of a frame from episode 1 at the very end of the clip where Polly is prepared for the fish person surgery.
Bring her here. Don't be difficult, girl. It's quite painless. Lights.
No! No!
We're ready now.
No! Ow!
The Macra Terror has 12.5 new images, including the highest number of half-frame images. From episode 2, we have 8.5. Our first image comes from the beginning of the clip where Ben rescues Polly from the Macra. The action shown here is clearly not in the released footage. Our next image is a half-frame from the end of the same clip. Our third image is also a half frame from the beginning of the next surviving clip where Ben and Polly see a second Macra. 2 frames from the end of this clip are also not included on the Lost in Time box set.
There's another one!
The next image is from the beginning of the clip where Ben and Polly run straight into a third Macra, and it appears to have suffered from some sort of water damage. We also have 1.5 frames from the end of that clip, but they are literally of a wall, so they aren't that exciting. Next, we have a frame and a half from the start of the episode 2 cliffhanger, and a half frame from the end. The half frames, by virtue of being half frames, were obviously not included in the Lost in Time box set, and the black crud on the whole frame gives that one away. Now on to episode 3, we have half a frame and 2 whole frames from the beginning of the controller's death and half a frame from the end of it. We skip over 8 stories now and arrive at Fury from the Deep, which has the most previously unknown frames of any story, with 23 images in total. The first comes from the Quill and Oak clip from episode 2, although unfortunately it comes from the end rather than the beginning, so it's just a picture of the pipeline venting gas. Next, from episode 4, we have another clip where it was difficult to pin down exactly where the raw clip ended and the released clip began. I think I finally figured out that this image from the end of the clip where the second Doctor says, "Come on, Jamie, let's get out of here," was not included in the released footage. Additionally, this image from the end of the lift clip was also not included, as it is missing the bottom quarter of the frame. The clip with the most unreleased footage, though, was that of Van Lutyens, and that footage is also among the most interesting, as both the beginning and the end show a different shot. At the beginning, we have the last 3 frames of this shot here, which is a low shot seemingly of Van Lutyens from the waist down, backing away from the weed. The one moving leg is the only thing that gives it away, though. It's really murky. Similar to the clip of Cherub being stabbed, you can see the end of the fade-in in the released footage. It's the material cut from the end of the clip that's really interesting, though, as it is a whopping 9 frames of footage, by far the longest segment I've found. And while it may only be of 2 door handles, similar to the smugglers clip, it saves a shot that would otherwise have been lost to time, and it lets us see how Hugh David followed up Van Lutyens' capture. Similarly, our first 2 images from episode 5 come from the beginning of the clip where Robson gasses the guard, and it actually shows the previous shot of his bedroom. Unlike the others I've mentioned so far, we actually did have this shot in a telesnap, however it was from the very beginning of the scene. What these 2 images tell us is that the scene probably began and ended with the same angle, even though there are shot changes mid-scene, which we can tell from the telesnaps. Another feature of these 2 images that I find interesting is that there appears to be some kind of weed growth on Robson's bed, which has changed since the beginning of the scene. Our next 2 images come from the end of the gassing scene, the second of which is missing part of the bottom of the frame. The next is one of my personal favorites, and it comes at the end of the clip where Robson starts the helicopter. The original clip actually ends 1 frame later with a crossfade to another shot, but even though the bottom of the frame is again missing, there is no mistaking the shot it cut to, as it perfectly matches a telesnap. From this, we can deduce that we saw Robson take off in the helicopter from this angle, rather than from directly beneath, as shown in the loose cannon reconstruction. Our last images come from the clip where the Doctor calls Robson in the helicopter. 1 image is from the beginning of the clip, and 2 are from the end.
Jimmy, can you hear me? Robson, come back, man, come back! Robson, don't you realize what they're trying to do to you? They're trying to control you, Robson!
Our last 2 images come from the Wheel in Space, when Bill Duggan electrocutes himself. Starting off, we have an image of some kind of control panel, probably the radio control panel that Duggan destroys, in another case of a shot which would otherwise have been lost. Our final image is from the end of the electrocution clip, and it's also just a continuation of the shot we already have. You can tell that it wasn't released, though, because Duggan is in a different position to how he is at the end of the released clip. So yes, these were the 48.5 frames of footage from missing Doctor Who episodes that I didn't know existed and that you probably didn't know existed either. It's really not much, but I was excited by these images, and I hope that you were too, because I got to see 48.5 frames I never thought I'd see in my life. It's hard to imagine that we've had them since 1996, but that I just never knew they existed. Like the footage from the Mythmakers episode 3, it's really a case of something hiding in plain sight. There always seems to be another secret regarding the missing episodes just waiting to be found. For those of you confused by what I meant regarding the Mythmakers episode 3, basically someone figured out that 2 of the 8mm clips that people thought were from episode 2 were actually from episode 3 the whole time, meaning that we have footage from every episode of the story, and we have for decades, but no one could figure it out. I'll include it here. Here are the places in episode 2 where Lost in Time and Loose Cannon put them.
Released but upon certain conditions.
And what are those conditions, may I ask?
That you use your supernatural knowledge to devise a scheme whereby we capture Troy. I will give you 2 days. 2 days to think of something really ingenious.
2 days. That isn't very long, is it?
It should be ample if you are as clever as you say you are.
And here's the place in episode 3 that they really should have gone.
So they will be. I shall be there with my Ithacans.
Eh?
My Ithacans and the doctor, of course.
That wasn't part of the plan.
It is now. I've just thought of it. I'm standing no more nonsense from you, Doctor.
That will not be necessary. I shall only get in the way.
You'd better not do that.
But yeah, I hope you all enjoyed, and I will see you next time.